Boulder County Courthouse, 6 marriage licenses in Boulder. Our speaker for the evening is one of our own. Erika is the owner and principal of Clerestory Preservation. First, working in the field of art conservation, joined the combination of art, science, and history, parent and beach restoration project. She's been having to work with the community. She discovered historic preservation and the right shaped places and people who live in them. She knew she would found home. Erika has a range of experience in many different aspects of the field, including architectural rehabilitation projects, nonprofit advocacy, grant writing, and project management, working in the Colorado State Historic Preservation Office and State Historical Fund grant program. She has extensive knowledge of state and federal preservation programs, including the National Register of Historic Places, Colorado State Register of Historic Properties. Meets the Secretary of Interior's Professional Qualification Center Sport Architectural History. How about this on this website? Above all, Erika has a great love of historic places, their stories, and the way in which those stories reflect and benefit diverse communities and the people within them. I think that's what really is going to be top. So with that,
yes, thank you very much, Joshua. Just a little bit more about me. I actually grew up in Colorado and moved away in my young adulthood, including attending and getting a degree with the Historic Preservation program at Columbia University. And actually, one of my professors was Teo Young, who is the founder of Docomomo. And so I was very excited to hear about Docomomo while in school. After coming back to Colorado, I became a member of Docomomo and then was very excited to hear that the Colorado chapter was forming. I had no part in that whatsoever, but I'm really glad that people did it. So thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here tonight. So the presentation I'll be giving is a version of the presentation I'll be giving next week at the Preserving the Recent Past conference in Boston. I say a version because you're kind of my guinea pig, so I'm going to make sure I'm covering what I want to cover. I'm also going to talk a little bit more about the architecture itself because this research and information is based on a National Historic Landmark that I'm the co-author of and which was recently by the Department of the Interior in December, making this courthouse a National Historic Landmark, or NHL, as I'll call it for short from now on, not to be confused with Tom. Anyways, I'll be giving a little bit more information about the architecture, even though that's not the crux of the NHL nomination, because it is a beautiful Art Deco building. Great, so we can move on to the next slide. So the first Boulder County Courthouse was built in 1883, and this is what it looks like. Beautiful Second Empire building. Unfortunately, it burned down in 1932. So next slide. It was replaced with a 1934 beautiful Art Deco courthouse that was partially funded by New Deal construction programs. It was designed by Glen H. Huntington, who was born in 1890 in Denver, and he was the fourth child of another architect named Glen Wood Huntington. Glen Huntington Jr., as it were, graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder in 1912 with a degree in civil engineering. And then he worked for the Illinois Central Railroad as a building inspector. And during World War I, he served in France with the United States Army. After a brief stint as a construction superintendent in Indiana, Huntington returned to Colorado and settling in Boulder in 1923, where he established what was then the only architectural firm in Boulder. In 1926, he hired the city's first female architect, Margaret Reed, who contributed to the design of the courthouse. Next slide, please. So a few examples of Huntington's designs include the 1938 Boulder Bandshell, which you may have heard of a lot in the news. It was listed as a Colorado Preservation Inc.'s Endangered Places in 2016. There's a lot of questions about its future. He also designed the 1937 Boulder High School with Earl Morris and Frank Flynn Jr., and as well as the Huntington Arms, which is a city of Boulder landmark, where he was the developer of this project as well. He lived there with his family until 1943. And then he also designed several buildings on the city campus with Charles Klauder, including the 1937 Baker Hall. Next slide. In the 1950s, the county government had outgrown its space, and so it made plans to expand it in a very sensitive way, I would say. The detached wings that you see here in a model were designed by Boulder architect Hobart Wagener and constructed by Ladco Construction Company of Denver, being completed in 1962. These new international style wings are connected to the courthouse via underground tunnels. Although now between the left wing that you see here in this slide and the Art Deco courthouse, there is a small hyphen connector on ground as well. So these were to create more spaces for law enforcement and district court functions. Wagener himself graduated with honors from the University of Michigan School of Architecture in 1944. During World War I, he served in the U.S. Navy, and then afterwards he joined a New York firm called Eggers and Higgins. And then he worked and studied with the celebrated modelist architect Pietro Beluschi in Portland, Oregon. He then moved to Boulder and worked as a chief draftsman for architect James Hunter. And then in 1953, opened his own practice and enjoyed a prolific career designing more than 200 residential, commercial, and public buildings, mostly in Boulder. He was elected an AIA Fellow in 1971, received numerous awards, and was recognized as Architect of the Year in 1985 by the AIA's Colorado chapter. So a few examples of Wagener's designs are the 1959 Green Shield Office Building, which is a Boulder city landmark, as is the 1954 LeBrogue House. And then the 1967 Sunset Enterprises Building was also his office. And then the 1969 Midland Savings and Loan Building, which today looks quite different than this photo, was made a city landmark in recent years. So that's the courthouse's architectural background. We'll kind of now go into, well, sorry, next slide, please. And just a few examples. This building and its wings has incredibly high integrity, including on the interior. The Art Deco signs for the elevator are still there. The sandstone cladding on the exterior and interior. And then, of course, the two wings from 1962. So it really looks as it did in 1975 when 6 same-sex marriage licenses were issued there. And these were the first in the country of their type. So we'll talk about that this year. Before we can talk about same-sex marriage, though, we need to talk a little bit about how marriage has evolved for straight people. You know, for millennia in the US and Western Europe, marriage was really a means to uphold societal values, creating this working relationship between husband and wife. It's worth noting that husband actually etymologically means master or steward. and wife is the equivalent of woman. So kind of shows you that dynamic that was kind of baked into the what marriage was for a very long time. In the 1920s, after the devastation of World War One, and not to say that there weren't some small changes along the way, there really was a kind of rethinking of relationships and this idea that marriage wasn't just to make life convenient and to create children, but it was also to find a companion that one had real connection with. So that was kind of introduced into marriage and remained. But after World War II, what we or historians have called the golden age of marriage, which was what we think of as 1950s housewives, really came into being. And it was just to kind of return to this domestic ideal that really actually hadn't quite ever existed before. And part of that was the prosperity of post-World War that allowed for a lot of middle-class families to have one working partner in the marriage, and that meant the wife was to stay home and create the household. Now, of course, that happened in the past, but when the wife was at home, she often also helped run a farm, helped run a very large household, or helped contribute to her husband's modes of creating financial gain for the family. So that's kind of regressed in a way to this golden age of marriage. And what we think of, or what has been given to society as like the traditional marriage, which is, kind of questionable. Was that really the tradition when it hadn't ever truly existed in the past before? Next slide, please. In the 1960s and 70s, though, there were some real societal changes that challenged those distinct gender roles that you had between husband and wife in marriages. A few of them include the expanding economy, which meant that women were more in demand in actual jobs that paid living wages and not as supplemental to their husbands' jobs. There was unprecedentedly reliable and easily accessible contraception, which meant families could have more choice as to how many children they had, if they had children at all. And then as inflation grew, it made this sole breadwinner model essentially untenable for a family to survive. Next slide. And then, of course, around this time, there was the women's liberation movement. A lot of this was focused on the Equal Rights Amendment, which actually sprang out of the women's suffrage movement of the 1920s, but really started to gain steam in the 1960s when it was going to Congress. At the same time, states were ratifying their own era amendments. And so it was really about equal treatment of people regardless of their sex or gender. Now, actually, at the time, conservatives who were very much against this amendment actually raised the issue of what does this mean for homosexual gay relationships? And feminists tended to say, oh, that's a red herring, that's hyperbolic, that's not what this is about. So they were a little less clear-eyed than the critics of the era movement. Around the same time, there were what have been called by some historians as the feminist family reformers, where they went and created a uniform law or model law for what a marriage law should look like. And a lot of states adopted these. Essentially, the purpose of this type of law was to create no-fault divorce, to eliminate gender disparity as far as how wife would be treated after divorce and how a husband would be treated, who had access to the children, etc. It was really meant to remove any decisions based on whether the person was a man or a woman. As a result, the gendered terms of like husband and wife were removed from those state laws in a lot of cases. And that'll come up again in a little bit. Next slide. When we have at the same, essentially the same time, a growing gay liberation movement, which really came about much earlier than this 1960s Stonewall that we think of as like the match point for gay liberation. It was actually forming with what was called at the time the homophile movement in the 1950s. And as early as the 1960s, there was a real serious discussion of should marriage be a civil right that gay people pursue or make demands for. And in this edition of One magazine from 1963, the author, Randy Lloyd, who historians are pretty sure is a pseudonym, was talking about the benefits of homophile, what he called homophile marriage, and talking about how marriage between two people of the same sex would be the way to actually get greater society to accept gays and lesbians, which I thought was very prescient. We also have around this time in the late 60s, the founding of what is called the Metropolitan Community Church by a former evangelical minister named Troy Perry. He was a gay man and he founded the MCC really as a way to bring gay people closer to God without judgment of their identity. And whereas other churches might say that they were accepting of gays and lesbians, they also kind of either said, hide that or change yourself. And he was saying, no, this is who we are. We should celebrate that and find our spirituality in concert with that rather than in opposition to that. So Perry was actually starting to perform civil private ceremonies of marriage where, it wasn't through any legal system. It was just a way to acknowledge the commitment between two people privately.
Where was he at?
He was in California. He was in Los Angeles. The MCC movement grew though, and there's a number of them in Colorado. If it's gay, it's very much an important gay institution. There was a real question though of whether marriage was something that gay, under the ideals of gay liberation, was marriage something that actually should be pursued. It was definitely seen as a patriarchal system, as it were, that was meant to kind of keep women in their place as essentially servants to their husbands, and so and the gay liberation movement was very much tied to we're not interested in these well-defined gender roles, and so why would we then want to pursue marriage? However, there's a lot of legal benefits to marriage, of course, tax breaks, ability to visit a loved one in the hospital, ability to adopt a child that is the child of your spouse. So in the end, as part of the protest format of gay liberation, a number of same-sex couples decided to try to apply for marriage licenses. And so here you have the first known example of this, Jack Baker and Michael McConnell in Minneapolis in 1970, where they went to the county clerk and asked for a marriage license and were denied. There were a number of these, at least 10, but a few of them actually sued, including Baker and Docomomo. They actually went on and got another license through a different county that I'll talk about a little bit more, that actually became successful. So they actually were the first known gay couple to receive a marriage license in the US. Next slide, please. A few other examples of this kind of license application as protest, which just wasn't just about protest, it was about trying to acknowledge loving, committed relationships. But here we have John Singer and Paul Barwick in Seattle, 1971, and their thoughts on kind of some of why they were doing this. In Singer's case, it was really to get attention through the press. Of course, these photos exist because they made sure the press were there to take photos of them applying for licenses. And then Barwick's take of like, this is really about equality and fairness, even if I don't necessarily want to be married. Next slide, please. Then there were actually a few cases where same-sex couples applied for licenses, not even intentionally with a bit of subterfuge, but it actually turned out that the issuing clerk did not understand that they were issuing it to a same-sex couple. So in this case, Tony Molina and Billy Ertz received a license in Dallas in 1972. Billy Ertz was a female impersonator or drag queen, and apparently was dressed as a woman when they went to apply for a license, and the clerk did not question that. Their marriage was soon found out, however. I think they were very vocal about, hey, we got a license, you know, and their marriage was immediately nulled, found void, and they were actually threatened with criminal charges of false affidavits. The same happened in Arizona, in Phoenix in 1975, where two men, Tony Sakuya and Sam Burnett, applied for a marriage license. However, in this case, the clerk knew that they were two men, went to look at the state law and saw that there was no requirement of it be a man and a woman. This goes back to those family reform laws that were passed just a few years earlier. And so kind of, even though he really didn't like it, he went ahead and issued them a license. He instructed Sakuya to fill out the woman's portion of the license application. Again, it got a lot of press and was found out and found to be null and void by the district attorney. And then Sakuya was charged again with a false affidavit, even though he had followed the instructions of the county clerk. So a few examples of licenses actually being issued.
Who's up there? The one that says the law says I can't issue a license to persons marrying uncles or cousins.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in the law about it.
That's right. Yep. So those uniform laws really just talked about the only types of prohibited marriages were incest, underage, I think bigamy, but never didn't say anything else. So yeah, he followed the letter of the law, as it were. But
well, isn't it just recently that a lot of states have actually pushed this that in some states even fairly, I mean, am I mistaken? Some states with like 6.
yeah, it depends on the state, but yes, I think that's
Still
right.
fairly recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
Minor
And that was
A cousin.
And a cousin.
13, not a cousin.
And that was definitely another aspect of those
Right.
uniform model laws, where it was a different age.
Right.
Girls could marry at a much younger age than boys or men, as it were. And those laws said, no, everyone has to be the same age, whether it's 16 or 18.
Right.
Okay, next slide, please. So this brings us to the Boulder licenses. which really opened what has been called a Pandora's box of same-sex marriage. Because in the spring of 1975, a series of marriage licenses were knowingly issued to same-sex couples. So this goes beyond, the ones that were denied, the ones that were issued kind of without an understanding of who the applicants were, or one in, that the Arizona case that was immediately invalidated. This was knowingly applying the Colorado law, but again, and had no gender specifications as to who could get married. Next slide. So who were the people involved with this? Cleveland Rorix was elected the county clerk in the election of 1974 and began in the office in January of 1975. So just a few months before she started issuing these licenses. She was an ardent feminist, and her politics on that subject were well known before the marriage licenses came up. So here you have an article from the Greeley Daily Tribune that talks about how she uses a license plate that says Ms. 1. And at the time, Ms. was a very controversial honorific because it dared to reject this notion of either being married as a Mrs. or being a maiden as a Miss. And of course, she has yes, equal rights on her bumper sticker as well. And so they were making it very clear, that she is a feminist.
As if there's anything wrong.
Right, exactly. And then at the time, there was the assistant DA, Bill Wise. So let's move on. I'll talk a little bit more about those two. So on March 26, 1975, a couple arrives in Boulder, named Dave McCord and Dave Zamora. They were from Colorado Springs and had actually tried to get a license in the El Paso County Clerk's office, who told them that that law didn't allow it, but maybe if they went to Boulder, they'd have some luck. So logically, how do you square that? I don't know. But she was not incorrect, because when they did arrive in Boulder, Cleela Rorix, the county clerk who you see in the background here, actually did indeed agree to issue the license to them. She did so because a few weeks before this had happened, a lesbian couple had approached her office asking about the legality of a marriage license for two women. And she approached Assistant DA Bill Wise, who then looked at the state law and said, actually, it doesn't say one way or the other. So in my opinion, it's legal. And if it's something you want to do, I think you are justified to do so legally. As a feminist, Rorix felt that she couldn't deny someone marrying the person that they wanted to marry just because of their gender, being essentially a man rather than a woman in this case. So she agreed to issue the licenses. Again, clearly there was some press alert happening because there was someone from the Denver Post to take a photo of this happening. The man you see here filling out the license for them was Pat Prince. He actually went on to become one of the applicants for a license in just a few weeks later. So anyways, Rorix knew that what she would say if approached to issue the license. And so when actually the two Daves came before her, she said yes. Next slide, please. She definitely got a lot of mail about this. Some was in admiration of it. And of course, a lot of it was in outrage. She received threatening letters and phone calls to her home, but she continued issuing licenses for the next several weeks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. She got a lot of press across the country where folks were talking about why she was doing what she was doing. Some of it was taking it very seriously. Others were very kind of flippant reporting that thought of this as just a strange thing. But I thought this was a great quote from the former executive director of Out Boulder County, which is a gay advocacy group in Boulder, talking about how Clerestory was just able to look past the current issues of prejudice and really sticking to what she thought was right. Next slide, please. So there were 6 licenses issued from March 26th to April 21st. The couples were mostly from Colorado, but a few came from other states. There's someone at the door.
Christine.
I will use that as an opportunity. So there was enough press about Rorix's actions across the country that some couples traveled to Boulder with the express purpose of getting a license. They had various reasons for doing so, including they loved each other, they wanted to commit to each other. They also, and some of these overlapped. They also wanted to protest the lack of equality for gays and lesbians when it came to marriage. And of course, they wanted to enjoy the legal protections, including immigration and financial. As I mentioned, Pat Prince was employed with the county clerk office. Clerestory had no idea he was gay until he applied for a license. And she actually said that she didn't know any gay people when she decided to do this. So it was very eye-opening for her as well. Eventually, there was enough of an uproar that the state attorney general decided to issue an opinion saying that he thought these licenses were not legal, but had no plans to challenge them in court. And so the licenses were actually never invalidated. A number of couples went on to become divorced, however. But we'll talk about the one couple that stayed together. Next slide. This was Roger Adams and Tony Sullivan. Tony Sullivan was an Australian citizen, and so was actually in the country overstaying his visa and was there illegally. So part of why they married each other or wanted to get married was that they wanted to get a green card for Sullivan. They actually heard about Rorix issuing the licenses on the Johnny Carson show, again as a joke, like, oh, look at this goofy thing that's happening in Boulder. And they're like, wait, maybe we can do that. So they traveled there, got a license, and immediately petitioned for a green card, which was rejected with a very obscene letter from the immigration authorities. They then went on to begin a nationwide tour where they were trying to rally support, and they remained happily married until Rogers died in 2012. Sullivan's green card was eventually approved on their 45th first wedding anniversary in 2016, a year after this U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that same-sex marriage was constitutional. Next slide, please. So just wanted to talk a little bit about how did we get to a National Historical Landmark of the courthouse where Clerestory issued these licenses, kind of the first of their kind. When I was working with the Colorado State Historic Preservation Office, or History Colorado, as you also know it, we knew of the courthouse and its connection to LGBTQ history. The Boulder County Courthouse was part of the downtown Boulder National Historic District, but we wanted to recognize the courthouse's contributions to LGBTQ history itself. So we pursued technically what was an amendment to the district's nomination that talked about some of this history. At the State Review Board meeting, Clerestory attended, which was amazing. And there was a lot of emotions where people went on to talk about hearing about this, this phenomenon, what she was doing in 1975 as a teenager, and people actually feeling some hope that they might be able to live a life that they wanted to live. So the amendment was successful and was put into effect in 2018. The plaque that the Boulder County Commissioners put up, of course, is a little inaccurate when it comes to the ins and outs of what, as a historian. So it wasn't the first same-sex marriage licenses that were issued in the country. There were a few others, but they were the first in a series where the clerk knew exactly what she was doing and was doing it because she felt it was a fair application of the existing law. So Cleo Rorex died in 2022, just as we started to pursue a National Historical Landmark. When we were doing the National Register nomination, we had an inkling that it was nationally significant, but just didn't have the resources at the time to kind of dive deep into that whole context that I gave you in the previous sections of my presentation. So it was listed at the statewide level, but fortunately we were able to go on to do a National Historic Landmark nomination. Before I get to that though, just real quick, this is a photo collage of various important events in Boulder's history. And I should highlight it, the marriage license photo of Dave McCord and Dave Zamora is now one of those that was put up after the National Register nomination. So after many years, next slide, I'm happy to say that the courthouse was finally designated a National Historic Landmark in late 2024 in recognition of its LGBTQ plus nationally significant history. At the time, it was technically, these events were technically less than 50 years old. And so part of what we talked about in our nomination was how it was of extraordinary significance, so that it met the criteria that kind of pushes beyond the typical boundary of 50 years as a usual cutting off point. Alan, and next slide, which is my last. So I just want to thank you for hearing me out about this. It was a very rewarding project to work on. Again, I was the co-author. My colleague Amy Unger with Pine Street Preservation, based in Alma, which is near Breckenridge, Colorado. She was the co-author with me on this, and she also previously worked at History Colorado. So thank you. Yes. Yes.
So I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow.
I hope it wasn't too fast.
No. So it is on the National Register.
Yes.
What is the presentation you did in Boston?
So it's essentially this.
Okay.
So the conference in Boston, are you familiar with what that is? No, it's called Preserving the Recent Past, and it's actually not an annual conference. This is the fourth such conference that's ever been. It started in the 90s with a real purpose of trying to acknowledge recent historic architecture, modernist, really kind of, again, starting off just as Docomomo did, of pushing to, let's look at architecture, not just from the Victorian era, but way up until recent times. And so while most of the conference will be definitely about architecture, there was an opportunity to talk about social events that were happening. And so I submitted an abstract and it was accepted.
So it's a done deal. You don't have to worry about the current administration not approving something because.
Yeah, I mean, it's the conference is partially funded by the Park Service. Unfortunately, I know that at least a few Park Service employees won't be able to attend who are planning to attend. I mean, that's pretty benign. I don't know if there will be other repercussions. When they talk about, like, I'm sure you've heard in the news, Stonewall, which is a National Historic Landmark and a National Historic Site run by the Park Service, they have removed T and Q from LGBTQ because transgender queer is not acceptable. But I don't know. All I can say is that that's not the actual history of a place, and so I think it's important to just stick to the facts, and these are the facts. So.
Is the building, so is the whole building listed, or is it including the Wagener
Yes.
wings?
Yes. So Cleva Rorix's offices were mostly in the 1934 portion. However, she did have some space in the 1962 wing. And so the boundary, typically National Register and NHL nominations don't want to just cherry pick and do like a footprint of the building. They want to kind of look at the whole setting. And so the whole courthouse property, its grounds, everything is part of the designation.
I think that's fantastic because, I mean, that building, and I think it's a great example, that building and it's not a Wagner project, but the modern addition of the Brown Palace are both really great examples of a thoroughly modern building.
Yeah.
Absolutely respects the original building that it's a part of.
Yeah,
I think that building is a beautiful example of that.
I agree.
Did Wagner also do that addition to that Presbyterian church up there
Yes.
with the folded
Methodist.
plate?
I believe I know exactly the one you're talking about. It's
Which-
right, it's catty corner from the courthouse. That has an LGBTQ history as well, but unrelated to the courthouse. But yes, he designed that addition, which is really
is-
amazing.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
talk about modernists get this bad rap that, oh, we reject everything. No, I mean, this is totally sympathetic architecture. It's beautiful. That courthouse is so.
Yes, I would say we get the chance to speak on a national platform. In after Overfeld, everybody thinks it's settled law,
Right.
and now we have nothing settled law. All of a sudden, they burned settled law and become grounds on
Right.
things are made. And if you want a story, so my daughter, who was a C grad, was engaged in December at Union Station and a lovely engagement, and her fiance of her in January, and I decide, and her fiance got a law student, and I said, I know you guys think Overfeld is law and that you have time, but the world is changing, and this was a very, very anti-LGBTQ. And it just erased all the gay photos in the National Archive. The Enola Gay was just taken off of the stand documents because it had the word gay in it. It's funny, but not funny.
Yeah.
Because you're with, so I said, I am begging you, because if you get married now, it is the law, and then you'll be married. If they take it away tomorrow morning, you got married yesterday. So my daughter was like, that's not true. And then that one happened in Colorado. I'm like, are you never going to travel? What if you get ill in Texas or Arkansas or Missouri or South Dakota, Oklahoma? So they went and got married in Denver. Because people are still scared.
Yeah.
And people know that things are not settled law anymore. And what she represented in terms of being a clerk and allowing for couples to have the same rights as any other couple. In fact, the couples getting married didn't have another place to go or were frightened about the rights, would they be able to stay in the country, etc. But that's still happening as we speak. And I was like, I was texting, I'm like, is it tomorrow? And she's like, I'll tell you when it happens. I'm like, I'm working now. So I don't have to watch the news every day to see if you've made a proclamation that a marriage is moving. It'll be a marriage. No, decree. Yeah, no, decree it. And then, and there's so many things, so many things happening. What?
Golf Street.
So anyways, it's still happening.
Yeah.
And glad it's not happy you did this. Thank you.
Yeah.
How did the research process go? Because like you were saying, you guys have inklings that there was a rich history at the courthouse, but obviously the deep dive discovering about.
Yeah, I mean, so we knew about the events of Rorik's issuing the licenses. And, you know, even at the time, the press was, like the New York Times was saying, this is the first that we know of this happening. Of course, you know, there were many instances where couples got married and said, we're the first to ever get a license, and they were actually. But, you know, with national news outlets, and it was different. It wasn't just a one-off. So it seemed like it was possible that it was unique as a starting point for thinking about same-sex marriage. But where and why, or how and why was, just kind of digging deeper into, there's a really amazing book called Marriage Equality. It's like this thick. And some of the authors actually interviewed some of the couples that Rorik's gave licenses to. We unfortunately, I wasn't able to track down most of them. Sullivan and Rogers got a lot of attention, so I didn't feel like I needed to add more to that, but I really wanted to be able to talk more about the other couples. And there was a little bit of information that they had from their interviews. But yeah, just looking at lots of different, you know, primary sources of contemporary news, but also the multiple historic interpretations of marriage equality in the US and marriage itself. Yeah, I have a lot of marriage books. It's very interesting.
I thought you did a good job summarizing it though, with like the first slide on the topic of like taking us back to like the time periods of marriage. I thought that was helpful. I was like, wow, you're really summarizing it well, but obviously it's like an elaborate topic.
Yes, yeah, much more in depth in the nomination itself. But which I'm happy to share, you know, through a link. Yeah. If anyone wants to.
Yeah, I gotta believe that for all these years of civilization, there are laws and people being people that weren't trans persons in the past. And
There actually
as,
were.
as some other gender and got married legally. And
Yeah, there.
maybe after their deaths, it was outed, so, but that had to happen. I mean,
Yeah,
it had to.
absolutely.
I mean.
Actually, a few instances
Yeah.
we were able to uncover and just
Yes.
you know kind of briefly mention as just more background. Yeah, absolutely happens.
And also this notion, I mean, something about the institutions. There is this myth about this marriage. I mean, it's you don't have to go in, you know, multiple spouses weren't unusual, still aren't in a lot of places. And the domestic family, I mean, and all the social mobility. I'll shut up because I'll get out.
When you bring up an interesting topic too that I didn't mention, that you know a lot of the couples that sued when they were denied their license and were sued for them, and the ones that actually were not dismissed at the outset and kind of went through the courts a little bit more, they were definitely in the end preferitorily dismissed, where the judges were like, you know, children can't come from this marriage, so therefore it's not valid. But of course, like there are many people who married way before this ever.
Women can't
Right.
get married.
Right, like that's not ever something that.
Men, well, we ain't got no Viagra around here, buddy.
Right.
None's married either. That's
That's
the
right.
the Catholic Church. And today, early on in time, none of us knows have been impregnated. My sad husband.
Well, that Holy Spirit,
Well, work was apparently, but never again. But one of.
What are some other projects that you're working on?
Well, we've been doing a lot of NHL nominations, Amy and I. One of them that I talked a little bit before with a few people We racked up a draft of a nomination for a ballpark in Bisbee, Arizona. That was the site of a miners' strike deportation. So in 1917, copper miners were striking, and they were really disruptive to the whole industry, which the World War I effort was based on, the use of copper. And over 1,000 miners were rounded up, essentially kidnapped and forcibly marched 3 miles to this ballpark, were detained there for several hours, were interrogated, and then loaded onto cattle cart and deported out of Arizona into New Mexico, and just kind of left there and told not to come back. Of course, the irony being that the ballpark itself was constructed as a recreational, by the mining company as a recreation place for their miners to kind of keep their miners happy so that they wouldn't, ask for more money. So that's one. We're working on a few national parks, one in Michigan called Sleeping Bear Dunes. There's a lighthouse and like skating station on islands there that we're working on. And the Highline Canal, which of course is fundamental to Denver's history and development. We're just getting started on the context for that for the Highline Canal Conservancy. So,
National landmark?
no, at this point, it's really just a context, really just kind of going into that deep history so that the Conservancy has more information that they can interpret to the public. As a 70-mile long canal, it's probably not feasible to designate.
No.
But I'm realizing I don't actually know where it defines a national historic landmark. So what is that?
Yeah, good question. So the National Historic Landmark Program was actually created in the 1930s. And it was a way to, the first kind of national designation program established to designate places that are considered nationally important to the country's history. Then in the 1960s, as the historic preservation movement really got underway, the National Register of Historic Places was created. There's, of course, some understandable confusion with the term National Register. It actually doesn't mean or imply that some place listed in that register is nationally important. Actually, the vast majority of them are considered locally important, but it's a national list, as it were, of historic places. So the National Historic Landmark is essentially the cream of the crop of designation within the US. And so you have to be nationally significant. You have to have a very high degree of integrity in order to be considered eligible for a landmark. And then a nomination really has to go in depth and kind of lay that full argument out. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you go to favorite national landmark something?
Landmarks.
What's your favorite national landmarks, like besides the one that you?
There's so many of them. And frankly, I know the Colorado ones better than any others.
That's like your proud song.
Yeah, I mean, I love Red Rocks. Red Rocks is in NHL. I will say, I also, for the fellow architecture nerds, we did an NHL update for Taliesin West in Scottsdale, and we're able to stay in the fellows' housing there, which was amazing. So that was pretty special because it was really our work was trying to, even though technically the NHL boundary was for the whole landscape, 400 plus acres, the original nomination didn't actually talk about the landscape. And so part of what we were doing was then going in and talking about the landscape that of course was integral to Wright's design of the campus. So-
Did that include the shelters, the student shelters?
So the student shelters are part of the nomination. They range in dates, and of course, the older ones are more like foundations than anything anymore, but, yeah.
I'd like to mention Susanna Drake.
Oh, do we have comments on the,
Landscape architect, and architect. And then we're working-
do we have any comments online?
No.
No.
This would be a good program.
Yes.
That's a big
Huh? Susanna Drake. Montecou Crew is why
What's it, what are they gonna do with the,
they're in a bit.
what are they gonna do with it?
That's for project. Just started it last fall.
So that, the architecture school there closed a few years
Yeah.
ago. And I think they're really trying to think of ways to use it then, especially the stuff that the public doesn't.
Pretty ephemeral building.
Yeah. I mean, it's right, so it's, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other announcements?
There was another, thing up in the Collins, the Privileged Technology Group.
Oh, yeah, yeah, APT is hosting a workshop, and I'm blanking on what that date is. It's coming up. April, yeah, that's great.
Where is that?
So that one's in Fort Collins, and Hebrew Craftsman is hosting it. So it's a talk that's at Odell Brewing. So I don't know the date, but that is, we reposted it on our LinkedIn and it's on a website. Oh, yeah, that should be really good.
Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second.
Joe.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
There we go.